the world that we see out there is a construction of our mind. I don't think that it's, if my mind wasn't here, I wouldn't be experiencing having this conversation with you. I wouldn't be seeing you. I wouldn't be hearing you. None of that would be happening. So for me, I very definitely live inside my own mind. I feel like I can't really understand any other possibility. But if I live inside my mind, the interesting thing that happens is that you're never actually truly asleep, or truly awake. You're always going from one state of consciousness to the next. So when you go into a dream, you're just entering another hallucinatory experience of the mind. You're entering another mental construction of mind.
My guest today is Alex Berkeley. Alex is an author, mystic, and the son of a near death experiencer. His father had a near death experience in 2001 at 55 years old as a result of a heart attack. Alex was 9 years old at the time, and his father's NDE profoundly impacted his way of looking at the world. He is the author of the book, Why Does Reality Exist? And is currently in the process of writing a second book exploring the ineffable aspects of near death experience. Originally a skeptic, after numerous mystical experiences in contemplation of NDEs, he now believes there is something beyond this worldly domain, something realer than real. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. I love that you have this book out that it talks about reality, right?
Yes. It's a very strange thing to exist. So I had to write a book on it.
I don't want to go too deep into it, but a question that I like to ask myself just to contemplate reality
Yep.
is why does anything exist instead
Yep.
of nothing? And it's a
Yeah.
paradox. It's not something you can really even think about.
Yes, and I think one of the things I'm going to get into is that this is not a question that's strictly within the scientific domain, that it has to require us to think beyond that. So I think near-death experiences kind of provide a good window into other approaches of thinking about this type of question.
Well, I'm excited to hear your input on that. And also, if my viewers, they love to hear about near-death
Yep.
experiences. If you want to tell us about what happened with your father.
Yes, yeah, so that's a good place to start. I just want to preface what I'm saying by emphasizing again that I'm not a near-death experiencer, and I think that's important to make that caveat because I'm very much a believer in direct experience. I don't think there's any substitute for that. I think you can, describe something all you want, but unless you've had that actual experience, you're going to be missing sort of a window onto something. So, with that said, my father's near-death experience profoundly impacted both me and him in kind of different ways. But let me begin with describing my father's near-death experience. So I'm going to be narrating from kind of his point of view. So when I say I am speaking, from his point of view. So his near-death experience happened back in 2001, a little before September 11th, so like September 8th, 2001. He was 55 years old at the time. I was 9 at the time, and he had been a smoker for many years and it finally caught up to him. So he had a heart attack, flatlined, and found himself in the hospital. He flatlined, and here we go. This is his experience speaking from his point of view. So I flatlined. I'm aware that I have died. I am aware that I am outside of my body. And strangely, it doesn't feel off at all. It feels completely normal. And I'm just moving forward, moving forward. And then all of a sudden, this wash of intense peace comes over me. I can't even describe that level of peace. It's just outside of this vocabulary that I have words to describe. And then all of a sudden, two beings, I don't know what to call them. I don't know what to call them, but the best words I have to describe them would be beings. They appear on both sides of me, but I can't see them. It's an important detail. I can't see them. I can only feel their presences. And we communicate mind to mind. No words are spoken. We just speak mind. We communicate mind to mind. And it's not a communication through, you know, mental words or mental sentence structure. It's just instantaneous thought, and we understand what each other means. And the beings ask me, do I want to stay or go? And I thought about that and I reflected, and I felt that I had more to do. So I chose to go, to return in quotes. And I woke up in the hospital, and you know, that was that. A nice nurse gave me this crushed ice that I was made to drink, and I came back into this worldly reality, and that was it. That was his experience. It's a very succinct experience. I'm sure you've gotten a lot more elaborate near death experiences, but as I'm sure you're aware, it's very strikingly prototypal. Not sure if I pronounced that word right, but it's the standard NDE experience, and it profoundly impacted both mine and his life.
To discuss how it impacted your life is important to understand. We think of near death experiences as a personal experience most of the time. And especially, I think people that haven't had a near death experience, we think, oh, you had an amazing experience. That's a beautiful story. And don't think about how it affects the others around that person who had the experience. So
Yeah.
I love to hear your take and how it affected you and how it changed your life.
Yeah, so at the time, I was a skeptic. I don't think well, I didn't use that word. I'd never even heard of that word, but that's what I was at the time. I just didn't really believe in it. I was made to go to religious school, and I hated that. I just thought it was like indoctrination. I thought it was cuckoo. It didn't work for me. Um, and that was tough. And basically, I had just associated everything with spirituality kind of under this bucket of stuff that I, you know, just, didn't believe in. And so when he described the experience to me, I thought, um, this is an interesting experience, but I couldn't make heads or tails out of it. I really didn't have a bucket to put this in. I was, I still remember the day that he told me. I was at Friendly's, a family restaurant in the Northeast, serve mashed potatoes, grilled cheese, and pickles. And uh, it was a casual day, and my twin was next to me, and my father described it a year after his near death experience. And I just remember just not having any kind of box to put this in. I asked him all the usual follow-up questions. Are you sure it wasn't hallucination? He said, yes, it was, felt just as real as this conversation I'm having with you now. I asked him, are you sure that it's proof of life after death? And he said, you just have to be there. I can't put into words the feeling. You just have to be there. And I think that's very difficult for people from a rationalist scientific perspective to understand, because they want to be able to prove something objectively. They want to be able to nail it down and say, here it is. But I think what the near death experience is challenging us to do is to actually empathetically get inside the mind of a near death experiencer, to actually feel what it's like from their perspective. Even if you can't get there, to appreciate that they're not liars in mass. They are not just saying, "Oh, this is a interesting story." They're speaking from their heart what they went through. So again, I'm 9 years old, at 10 at this time, and didn't know what to make out of it. Then 11 years later, I'm starting to develop a bit of mystical awareness. I've had some mystical experiences, so I'm starting to become aware that there may be things outside traditional reasoning. It's not just as simple as saying, because this, then that, and then kind of rational reasoning. There's actual things that are, can't be predicted, challenge our traditional notions of space and time, um, all that stuff that people that go through mystical experience encounter. So I was kind of cued into that, and then from that, you're still kind of skeptical of this all, like, are you just hallucinating during this experience, or like what's going on with these mystical experiences? Um, but what happened was that I'm 21 years old, so 11 years after my father's near-death experience, and I wind up on a website called NDERF, Near Death Experience Research Foundation. And I remember reading the first account on there, and my jaw drops because what they're describing was so similar to my dad's experience, not just in terms of thematic overtones, but, and this is the point that I really want to emphasize because I don't think people are appreciating enough, it comes down to their little literal word choice, the way that they use to describe their experiences, the way they enunciate, the way they qualify, the way they caveat, the stylistic choices, they'll capitalize certain words. Um, it's uncanny. There is something going on here that is deeply esoteric, deeply ineffable, and I don't think it's adequately explained by theories about hallucination, about expectation. So when I read that first account, I was like, this must have been a fluke, like, just just luck. And I flipped to the next account and it was the same thing. And then the same thing and the same thing. And that's when I realized that I really had to kind of adapt my way of looking at the world. I was being challenged to kind of see that reality is not just as simple as you make it out to be. I mean, at that time I lived 21 years and I only experienced so much, but humans, we think that we know everything, but the truth is that we only see a very limited slice of reality. We have trichromatic vision. We see red, green, blue, but there are other beings out there that see ultraviolet. They have echolocation. We don't know what that feels like. These are actually sensory experiences that we don't know. We don't have any idea what they feel like. The scientific method can't get inside the mind of that experience echolocation, but it exists. And I think near-death experiences are ultimately an opportunity for us to be a little bit more humble towards the limitations of what we know and be more accepting, um, towards the possibilities. Because I think once you experience the ineffable, once you experience something that you didn't think was possible, you start being more open-minded towards things like me. Well, I didn't think that was possible, so maybe there is life after death. Maybe there is something beyond kind of this window out into the world. I mean, after all, why am I even here to begin with? So that was kind of my evolution from skeptic to kind of mystic.
I love that you're doing this as well because there is so many skeptical minds that need more than just stories. In fact, I am a skeptic as well, you know. I want to see some evidence other than just stories. And
Yep.
that's really coming to light. Science is embracing that the soul exists. I just interviewed a doctor not long ago who wrote a whole book on scientific evidence that the soul exists. And now, what you're doing as well, it's so important because I think the majority of society works in that way. They want to see some evidence, not just a story, because anybody can make up a story, like you said, but I
Right.
don't believe that the stories are made up. I believe with all my heart that the stories are true, and I loved science to
Yep.
follow and start showing that the stories are true and that there is no death and we exist after our body dies. So thank you very much for doing this research in your
Yeah.
book. Um, you have some mystical experiences yourself, is that correct?
Yes. Yes, I have. Yep. So yeah, I'm happy to get into that. So, kind of as an overview, I think the thing that distinguishes my type of mystical experiences from near-death experiences is that I call it spiritual amnesia, in the sense that, you have all these revelations, you have a lot of, uh, you know, your sense of self dissolves, time takes on funny dimensions, and that's very interesting. But what happens is that when I return from these experiences, I just get fragments of the experience. I only get sort of memories of what actually happened during it. But There were some instances when where I was challenged in terms of um, not thinking that something was possible, and then it turned out to be possible. So let me kind of give an example of that. Um, Honestly, I'm not a big numerology guy. I think that, you know, it's, I don't know much about it, but there was one day where I was just thinking about 333 over and over again. I just kept thinking about this number, and I walked into my dad's room, and he then told me, "Oh, the football team lost 3 points in the last three games in the last three seasons to the same team." And I was like, this can't be. This is a fluke. And then I said the number's five. And then I go in to watch America's Got Talent. And then there's a stage magician and he produces the card and it's five. And it says all in the air. There's five, 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 five. And I don't know, like, I try to be skeptical about it. I try to say, well, maybe this is just like a coincidence or something like that. But it really kind of does strain my mind to continue to go on to think that these things are just you know raw chance. So that was an interesting experience. The other experience I had, my mystical experiences generally have to do with time distortions and kind of seeing beyond um, this frame of time. So what happened was that I had a vision, and then the next day, I was thinking about someone showing up on my front doorstep, and no one shows up on my front doorstep. It's not like, it's just the mailman comes there maybe like once every 3 months to deliver a package that we may have missed or something like that. And this person I was thinking about, I had long forgotten about her. You know, his it was actually my friend's mom, and he had left school in a long time. I was just thinking about her showing up on my front porch. And this kind of rumination cycle lasted for maybe like 10 minutes. It was not ordinary thought cycle, and it happened after a vision, so it was kind of unusual. And um the next day, my mom tells me this was actually around when I was 21, and my father told me his near death experience. He said, "Alex, you won't believe who showed up on our front porch step." And it was the exact same person I thought about. And you know, again, it could be coincidence, but it does kind of stretch my imagination to come up with explanations. And I've heard many people describe more intricate precognitive experiences. And I don't think it's just enough to say that, oh, all these people are mistaken, they have false memory, they're confused. I don't buy any of that. I think that something deeper is going on here. So that kind of that set me off a little bit, having that experience.
When did you say was the last time that you saw her?
I was 21 at the time. I saw her maybe when I was like 12 or something. That was the last time
So,
I saw her.
coin coincidence, that would be
Yes,
quite a coincidence for someone to show up after you haven't seen them for a decade.
yes. It was insane. Like I couldn't believe it. I was like, this can't be real. And actually, before that, I had two other precognitive events that were kind of less. I'm more iffy about if it was just sort of like coincidence, but this one was just awfully coincidental for me.
Do you want to talk about those events as well?
Yeah, yeah. So the other one I was watching, this is actually a little bit, it's kind of terrifying, so I don't want to get into too much of the contents of it, but I was thinking about a certain plot line of a movie, and I just kept thinking about this. Well, maybe this actually happened, and maybe these people were trying to bend reality, and maybe something was going on with that. And then the next day, I watched a movie, and it was about the same plot line. And, again, I guess there are lots of science fiction movies out there, so I kind of thought, well, maybe it's just typical science fiction plot, but again, it's like, you know, awfully coincidental. So that was another experience that I had. And then the one before was sort of casual that, I was playing with my cat and dreamt that she would bite my hand, and she never bites my hand, and she bit my hand that day. And you know, I don't put too much faith in that one, but it's still like, three of these in a row. And what I guess do want to point out is that like that is something that I think with we call these phenomena synchronicities. And for me, the evidence that they do exist as a phenomenon is that we can expect that the rate of synchronicities should be relatively steady throughout one's life. There shouldn't be like any coincidence that happens if it's unusual. Shouldn't just happen at like, you know, so many in one period of month. It should be, kind of distributed throughout the months evenly. There's no reason why, September should show synchronicities more than December or something like that. But what I have noticed is an increased number of synchronicities, an increased rate of synchronicities at the time following a mystical vision. So they go up significantly after that. And I don't know what the reason is. I think it's because I'm more tuned into things. I've seen things from another kind of frequency, if you will. But that was something that I've noticed, and I think that it's not just as simple as saying that, oh, these are just coincidences that happen. If the coincidences change in their number of frequency, that also kind of says something about their their the reality.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think that you were born with gifts, or do you think you developed them over time, or possibly your dad's near-death experience has influenced them in any way?
Yeah, so good question. It was I don't think I'm particularly gifted towards this. I think that I do have an active imagination, so I think that kind of helps me a lot, is that I think, not traditionally a lot of times, and I think in sort of different ways of thinking from kind of the normal perspective. So I think that's helped me, but I don't, you know, like I was in a session a few days ago with some people that experienced spiritually transformative experiences, had near death experiences, UFO encounters, and I had brought up the point that like why didn't I experience this when I was younger? And like, what and they were less shocked by it. They had already been kind of coached, so to speak, in this. They had had a number of this growing up. They weren't so skeptically minded. But I kind of was in for a rough, um, you know, it was a little bit of a dramatic change. I called it an spiritual awakening because it really sort of kind of upset everything that I was thinking about. I was so set on rationalism. I was so set on, this is the only reality that there is. We just need empirical proof of everything, that I couldn't see kind of beyond that frame of reference. And when I heard my father's near death experiences, I started having some other kind of visions. That was when I knew it was kind of time to kind of adapt my perspective.
I want to talk about the question that I brought up earlier when we
Yep.
first started about I often think about why is there anything at all instead of nothing? And then to me, that's the ultimate paradox because how would we know if there was nothing? There wouldn't be
Yeah.
anything to know that there's nothing. And is there a universe where there's nothing? If that makes sense. I mean, there's no
Yes.
words to describe it,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's pretty mind-bending. And is that something that your book kind of touches on?
Yes, it does. And from my perspective, that, in order to kind of approach these questions, we need to be able to kind of go at it from a different perspective than we have traditionally gone about it. I think that a lot of people, again, are thinking very linearly. They're thinking in terms of assumptions of, space and time. For instance, a lot of people ask the question, what happened before the Big Bang? And that's a kind of a misinterpretation, in my view, of the whole phenomenon of the Big Bang. The Big Bang is an expansion of space and time. It didn't happen out there. There was no out. There was an expanded space time. So I don't think that there was a before. Technically, this is my perspective. I don't think that there was a before the Big Bang, but there was something beyond it in terms of something beyond space and time. And this is where the realm of uh, kind of the laws of physics are that kind of allowed for that singularity to be. And I think that this is the kind of realm that near death experiencers tap into. And in my book, I get into how having these visions and having these near death experiences can provide a window into it. So I'll provide a kind of an example of that is that a lot of near death experiencers, they describe their experience as being realer than real. So the way to think about that is, um, I don't know how familiar you are with kind of dream work and lucid dreaming and all that stuff, but essentially you can go through a period of dreams where you are convinced that you've woken up. And you're like, I've woken up, and then you have what's called the false awakening because you didn't wake up. And then you think that you woke up, and then you find out that you haven't, and you go through several false awakenings, and eventually, if things go all well, you do wake up into this reality, and then you're like, oh, of course, this is the actual real world. This, how did I mistake those other worlds as being real? You just sort of know intuitively. And that's what I'm trying to say is that I think that this kind of awareness isn't empirical in nature. It's an intuitive psychical feeling. It's a feeling, inward feeling that you just know. Um, you know, I can't prove to you that this experience is more real than my dreams, but it feels that way. It sort of has that feeling. And so likewise, near death experiencers are describing that this waking state of consciousness that we're in, that there's one step up further than that, that's realer than this, that this world sort of extends from that. And I kind of believe that once you're in this world, things sort of make sense. So when I was describing the revelations I had in my mystical experiences, I do like I get answers that do tap into this question, um, but I'm not able to return them when I come back, and I don't know why that is. It's a very weird situation. I think a lot of near death experiencers, when they come back, they left with fragments of the experience, and they say that we're here for love, and a lot of them speak about the fact that I want to retain all. They communicate to the beings, and the beings communicate that you can't retain all this knowledge back to them, and they say that I don't know what that knowledge was, but I feel like it has something to do with love. And I kind of feel similarly based on my experiences that I've had, but I think that NDEs have gone a bit further than I have with their kind of visions. Yeah, I think would be helpful. And I want to, because the book gets into NDEs a lot, and I want to talk about kind of how that fits into the equation. I think the biggest thing to emphasize about these experiences that they're ineffable, is that there's no vocabulary from which to describe these experiences that you have. So it's kind of like trying to describe the color pink to someone. I can use all these words, I can analogize it to you, but unless you yourself have experienced pink, you can't, um, you don't, um, you don't know what it is. So ineffability is something that near-death experiencers have to deal with when they're describing their experience. So just a quote I want to bring up. This is from near-death experiencer Rich Kelly. He says, people ask me, how do you become psychic? You don't become psychic. You are psychic. You stop you stop thinking about focusing here. You stop thinking of your sensory input here. You stop thinking about a whole frame of reference of being here. So we're constantly looking for connections, tangible things within this earthly reality to relate to. But the experiences that near death experiencers have and mystics have had go beyond that kind of traditional frame of reference. And I think where I try to come at this from is that this is very much an esoteric phenomenon. And what do I mean by esoteric? Esoteric means it is hidden knowledge. It is kind of knowledge only known by a small group of people. And so when we talk about kind of evidence for the reality of near death experiences and mystical visions, this is to me where kind of the rubber meets the road, is that a lot of what mystics and near-death experiencers are talking about is esoteric phenomena. It's not phenomena that can be understood by the common layperson. It's only something that if you were in that event, you would know. It's like, you know, a person that's an athlete going into a room full of computer scientists. Like, he's not going to have the same words. Their knowledge is esoteric. It's only known by a small group of people. So the way I think about near-death experiencers and the reality of it is that we can know that there's a reality beyond this world because what they're describing is esoteric. They're coming away from their experience with learned revelations that they could not have gotten from expectation. I don't find them adequately explained by, say there was a psychedelic chemical in their brain. I don't think that adequately explains why all of them seem to describe beings that they can't see that are communicating telepathically. I don't think there's a it just doesn't kind of fill in the holes for me on that one. But near death experiencers, they're coming from their experience with esoteric learning, things that they could not have gotten from expectations. So you take my father, for instance, he was a very religious person going into that experience. He expected to encounter a religious institution. That was what he was expecting in his mind. And if you're going with the theory of hallucinatory expectation, the natural question to ask is, why didn't he experience what he thought he was going to experience? Instead, he didn't experience that. He experienced this experience that he couldn't predict, I couldn't predict. So that was an example of esoteric knowledge. To elaborate on this point, um, even though I think that science isn't equipped to fully answer the near-death experience phenomena, I do think that there are useful applications for it. So I ran a survey asking a bunch of non-near-death experiencers what would they expect to see from an afterlife experience. So I pulled 283 people, asking them, suppose you have flatlined during a heart attack and you have an afterlife experience for 5 minutes. Describe what happens during that experience. Not one of them, not one of them replicated the vocabulary described by near-death experiencers. The beings that the beings described, they don't use the word beings, they don't use the word presences, they don't use the word entities. They typically talk in terms of either religious figures, angels, souls. They don't use the language that near-death experiencers are describing. So why is there like a drug in the brain that makes you spit out the word beings, makes you say entities? Like, no, they're, and you listen to how they're describing it. I want to pull up a few quotes on these beings to kind of show you this point. Going back to my father's near-death experience, he said something to this effect. I don't know how to describe it, but there were what I would call these two beings that I could sense. I couldn't see them, but I was aware of their presence. I don't know how I can describe them to you, but I guess the best word I could use to describe them would be beings. That's his description. Here's another description from Ellis Silver in the book, The Truth and the Light. There were presences. They were not people, and I didn't see anything, but I was aware of their minds. Again, can't see it, aware of their minds, using the word presences, not people. Yet another one. I then became aware that there was a being to my left. I couldn't actually look at it because it was so bright. I didn't notice a face or anything like that. Same phenomenon. I think what's going on here is that they're struggling to translate their experiences. Like, my dad saw a being, well, didn't see a being, he sensed the being, but he doesn't have the vocabulary to describe what that entity was. So, in terms of ineffability and esotericism, if people were coming back from the experience with ineffable experiences and it was just an hallucination, what I expect to have is a bunch of random dreamlike sequences from expectations. I'd expect there to be, bright golden roads. I would expect there to be, souls of relatives. I wouldn't expect them to get in the nitty gritty vocabulary that near death experiences use to discuss their experience, and yet it happens over and over again. So that to me was, you know, something that I noticed. Also, the near-death experiencers, they often talk, I've had some exchanges with, them, and they speak almost cryptically, kind of in code. One person even told me that she believes that she's channeling it. Another person said that she believes that she has prophecies. Um, you know, it's like they're giving me little indirect bits of evidence, but kind of leaving me on the edge of it. And something very tantalizing is going on with this, and I don't know what it is, but it's like very intriguing to me. And getting back to my point, I was having this communication with a near-death experiencer, and he just said to me, "It's like, look, I'll explain it to you, but I'll leave you to come up with a conclusion of what you think I experienced." So it's like, it's kind of here I am, trying to so hard to get inside their head, but they kind of know that there is this sort of gap between what I can know and what they actually experience. So that's kind of some of my thoughts on this. And I get into that in the book is that um, people walk away with these revelations that um, like for me, it was the feelings of interconnectedness and a feeling that we kind of all that we're the universe sort of experiencing itself. That's kind of my philosophy. And like I never thought about this before. This wasn't something that I really entertained. It's a weird notion. Um, I had a vision once that it was so strange. I was like just sitting here, and then all of a sudden, I kind of just felt that I was like an eternal, universal mind that was kind of like had always existed and will always exist. And I was kind of seeing through the eyes of all beings that ever existed, and it was kind of my mind. And it was very eerie, but I started reading some other accounts of mystics, and they were describing the same thing, and that kind of took me off because it wasn't what I was familiar with by traditional kind of religious teachings. It was really esoteric.
During your experience, were you in meditation?
Yes, yes,
Do you recommend a certain type of meditation to my viewers to help them get into that state of mind?
yeah. So I think one person told me that I thought really kind of changed the game for me was he said to me, you know, Alex, magic is for you. You know, don't try to prove it to someone else. You don't need to say this is it. Magic is for you. It's a deeply personal thing. Suspend everything that you think should happen to suspend your own belief system and be willing to experience anything and everything that can possibly happen. Open your mind to the possibilities. You don't have to explain it to anyone. And getting into that, um, with the kind of experience of doing meditation, clearing your mind. um some people say I am excellent. I think that's perfect. I source connection to source very definitely. um Astral projection being that's kind of inducing out of body experiences, all of these different ways about going about meditation. I think you have to make it personal, and I think that you need to my recommendation is not try to go at it with a conventional route. There are a lot of great mindfulness courses out there, and maybe that works for you. I feel like it needs to be personalized into your own sort of kind of internal a spiritual system. Do what works for you and go as far at it as you can. Don't listen to, someone says something's not possible, suspend disbelief. So that's what I recommend with meditation.
What kind of meditation do you do?
Particularly I've done more kind of it's more personal. It's kind of like I lay in a bed and I try to put myself in what's called a hypnagogic state. And hypnagogia is the state before dream. So it's once you begin to slide. And I think it's very interesting to come at this from this perspective because um, people, when they dream, they think that what's interesting, and sort of this is my metaphysics. I'm not going to say that this is necessarily the right one, but I believe that the world that we see out there is a construction of our mind. I don't think that it's if my mind wasn't here, I wouldn't be experiencing having this conversation with you. I wouldn't be seeing you. I wouldn't be hearing you. None of that would be happening. So for me, I very definitely live inside my own mind. I feel like I can't really understand any other possibility. But if I live inside my mind, the interesting thing that happens is that you're never actually truly asleep, or truly awake. You're always going from one state of consciousness to the next. So when you go into a dream, you're just entering another hallucinatory experience of the mind. You're entering another mental construction of the mind. You're going beyond and what happens is that this body that you imagine yourself to be in is really just an avatar for the self concept, and it sort of dissolves when you're in a dream state. And like the hypnagogic state because it's towards that point when you're just starting to slide into another state of consciousness. And during this experience, I get what I have called impossible thoughts, and they're thoughts that don't translate um, in words. I feel like they make sense when I'm in the moment, but then like once I snap out of the hypnagogic state, they said, "What was I thinking? That didn't make any sense at all." And then I'm back in the state. And I'm like, "Oh, that makes sense again. Now I understand again." And it's a back and forth type of thing. So that's kind of the meditation I do. I don't know if that's uh, you know I think it's what you would call trance. I think it's ultimately a kind of a trance state of mind. But I'm very interested in things like religious ecstasy, mystical experiences, uh, meditation. I think that there are many ways to go at this thing that are kind of transforming people's way of thinking.
Do you have out of body experiences?
I have had one. This was when I've been interested in this for like a long time, but like mind, what is consciousness? And when I was around 12, I got into lucid dreaming pretty extensively. And like, now I achieve lucid dreaming like 3 times a week. So it's just like it's very easy for me. But um out of body experiences to me are kind of like I actually think it's a little bit of a misnomer personally. I don't think that you're leaving your body. I think that the body was never out there to begin with. I think it was just, again, a mental construction. So the out of body experience is simply just you're detaching from the avatar of the body. And I have had a few. I've had a few where I have um induced through I call it astral projection, but it's basically you're putting yourself in the hypnagogic state, and there's some kind of imaginative devices that you can use. Like one is to kind of imagine the astral body leaving your body, and you're kind of pulling yourself out with a rope, and that was very helpful for me. Also listening to binaural beats during this, which is kind of a brainwave synchronization uh, technology. And from that, I was able to kind of feel myself leave my body and enter sort of this other experience. And to me, that was that was interesting. I don't can't say it was ineffable, um, but it was a very deep experience.
What happened in your out of body experiences?
Yeah, so one thing I did is I like to open doors because I like to see what my imagination naturally produces. And to me, this is actually a good indication that the world is kind of a mental construction, is that, when you open up the door, you know, you think that you're not creative, but you're actually infinitely creative. You don't have to put any action into it. Everything is already just there. So I'd open up a door and like there would be a casino and have all the bells and whistles to it, all the noises, all the smells, everything to it. There'd be, indentation to the woodwork of the casino machines. There would be just all the details. And like, how am I imagining this? In this experience, how is this even possible? And yet my mind just creates the entire experience of it. um that's been something that I've enjoyed doing. I also enjoy kind of just the natural flying around and you know seeing what kind of worlds I can explore. I like to try to do experiments where I I'm right now trying to focus on kind of splitting my mind to be at two different places at once. I haven't achieved that yet, but that's something that intrigues me a lot, is this phenomenon of bilocation, of kind of being consciously aware in two places at once.
Do you think from your research that when we die, we are actually waking up and this is more of the dream state?
Mm, yeah, so my thinking on this is that it's all real. I don't want to say like, you know, this world that we see in front of us is just kind of a hallucination. I think it's actually real. I think that there are cognitive experiencers on this world that are kind of constructing this experience, and it's kind of a shared mental construction of the world between different beings. Um, but what I'm sort of wondering if there's kind of this global, what I call a global theater of mind that's out there. So it's like, we're living inside a book, and for instance, I have this book next to me. It's on near death experience, but you're experiencing your life sequentially flowing through time, and you're born, you fall in love, you have kids, and then eventually you come to the end of the chapter and you die, and you're moving sequentially in time. But I think that there's this state where you kind of step outside of the book and you see all the chapters at once, the past, present, and future all at once. And when you're in that state, what I think's going on is that you discover that, you're not the only book out there. In fact, there's a lot of different books out there. There's a book on Alex, there's a book on Tia, there's a book on George Washington. There's all these different beings out there. I'm just sort of wondering if there's kind of this global theater of mind that kind of interconnects them all, and it's all part of the same sort of matrix. That's been kind of the way that I've gone about it. And that we're just kind of a we experience time like this. Maybe we may live 75 years from this point of view, and it feels so real when we're in this kind of linear construction of time. But step beyond it, from the creator's perspective, from the global mind's perspective, that was just kind of a wink. It was just a brief kind of wink in the eternal awareness. So kind of the evidence that I see for that is that near-death experiencers, when their body is shutting down, they're not describing, it's not like this old jalopy that just, once the body breaks down, consciousness becomes dysfunctional and it, goes haywire. They start expanding into new senses. They start seeing colors that they haven't seen before. They have 360-degree visions. They feel like they're existing in all places, in all people at once. They're existing at multiple places at once. All this phenomena is happening. And to me, what it suggests is that what we already know is that we don't, as I said in the beginning, we don't know what it feels like to have echolocation, but we know that it's a real experience on the world. And I think that near death experiences, when we die, they're kind of opening up into a broader form of awareness. They're stepping onto what I call a larger life. That this life that we experience is just one slice of a greater life. You know, it's it feels very real in your moment, but dying, to me, if my theory is right, is like, it's almost like pressing the home menu button on life. You're stepping back from it all, and you're sort of seeing the actual infrastructure of it. And you can't use words to describe it. It's not, space, time. Um, Getting back to near death, the meditation, one, as I said, it's kind of an I am. And one near death experiencer explained it as, um, you know, all you can say about this state is you are. Once you get into definability and you start kind of like defining it, that's when you get into earthly worlds. You start saying, start with you are. You go further than that, you start kind of like creating a little world, and you start kind of pigeonholing yourself into a perspective. Um, Another example I like to use is like, we're so enwrapped in a movie that we're like playing a movie, and we get so involved in kind of the characters of it all. And we come to feel like we are these characters and like we haven't been anything before, but it's like stepping behind the character. The script ends, and now you come actually back home. Um, and to me, this is a very interesting idea. Uh, I do see that there are some near-death experiences that share it. I think that there is a still a lot more to learn about this topic of like, to what extent are we actually separate from one another? To what extent are we all one? I tend to like the oneness perspective um, more. I think I've caught that some people actually don't like that perspective, which kind of scares me a little bit. But to me, it feels like we're all interconnected. Um, there's no such thing as death, and I don't see if we share one reality together. If you're seeing this world and I'm seeing this world, we're inevitably interconnected. My language is entering your mind, not because you're detached from me, it's but because you're interconnected with me. So we are, to my perspective, we're all ultimately one. You can't actually die. You can't actually, jump out of the game. You are plugged into the reality system. So that's sort of how I think about it.
I love that. We are all spiritual beings. We never die. There's no need to fear death. We can live life and not be so serious and live
Yeah.
without fear and enjoy our lives and each other. I think that's the biggest message that near-death experiences bring to us is not to be afraid because
Absolutely.
we live in fear. And our society is there is no real death grief support or death support. There's no that's so a taboo subject, and it's people tiptoe around that, and it really should be part of life that's celebrated, in my opinion. Not that we love to lose people. We definitely don't want to lose people. We love them and we'll miss them for our whole lives if they're gone from us, but it does more harm than good by not learning more about death and the afterlife and making it
Yeah.
a extreme religious event because people then think, well, were they saved or are they in hell or whatever. I think conversations are starting to open up more and more every day.
Yeah.
And you are doing research, and there's some other scientists doing research, and there's more people having near death experiences and sharing them. And this all started back in the 70s with Dr. Moody. Um, and I want to go do like a little kind of brain or like a thought experiment with you, going back
Yeah.
to when you were talking about how when we wake up or when we die, it's not really like we're waking up. This is real. We're in a real dimension. It's not like a dream. What
Yeah.
about if we go the other way and we talk about what our dreams are? Are
I've
those
been
really real dimensions?
Yes, yes. Great question. So, um, I kind of had this experience once that was like utterly, it was a little terrifying because I was in a dream state and then I had multiple false awakenings and I couldn't wake up from it and it just not feel real. It just felt like there was a feeling about it that didn't feel real at all. And I was like, what if this what death is like? And um, from my perspective, I think that ultimately there's no such thing as like an unreal perspective. I think that this is something that we need to understand more about is that, you know, we tend to label things and say, well, this person is psychotic and therefore their experiences aren't real, or this person was on drugs and therefore their experience wasn't real, or this person was in an unusual brain state and their experiences wasn't real. No, all experiences are actually real. There's no sense of saying that, you know, let's say I were to see rabbits jumping in front of me. From my point of view, that's a real experience. Now, you may not be experiencing that, but from my point of view, it actually is real. And the only world at the end of the day that I think any of us actually know is the world that we live in, which is our minds. We see our minds, we see our minds' creation. So when we go into a dream, it's a real experience. It's not like the universe is just having something that's not actually happening. The universe is having this mental creation that is your dream. But like I don't want to like just say that all, subjective experience is all there is, because I think that um I don't know, but I tend to think that there is some need for objective confirmation between multiple beings. I think what dreams could be is like a private form of imagination. This waking world is more of like a shared imagination, and then the world up may be like more of a unity perspective. So there's kind of like different frameworks. Like I'm having thoughts inside my mind right now. It's not shared, it's a private experience, but it's real to me. And it's a real experience, but it's not shared. But this communication through Zoom is a shared experience. And I don't know, it's different layers of reality. They're all real though.
I like that. Every experience is valid.
Yes, there's one thing that I'm totally fascinated about that I definitely wanted to talk about. And that is the mind-to-mind communication that near-death experiencers describe. Do you have time to get into that, or?
Please do. Yes, we have time.
Okay. All right. So this was actually the thing that really changed my mind and kind of convinced me about the reality of near-death experiences. Like, why are so many of them having telepathic communication? It's just not something that you would expect to have happen. Studies show that something like 35% of near-death experiencers have tele research that I've done. I've looked at the last 200 reports on nderf.org, and I see that roughly 35% report telepathy. However, again, the word choice is very esoteric. They don't use the word telepathy. Instead, they talk around it because, again, it's ineffable. There's not any words to describe it. So the way that most near-death experiencers describe it is that it feels kind of like a download of information. It's like, this book that I have here, if I were to communicate all aspects of this book to you, every single sentence structure, my feelings on this, um, everything. It was actually the moderator to the Reddit forum had brought this to my attention, that it was kind of knowing what the Matrix feels like and everything about it. So it's like you kind of have this all sort of knowing of once that everything is understood um, instantly. There's no miscommunication, no room for ambiguity. Um, and I don't know. I find this awfully, coincidental that a number of near-death experiences describe it in the same way. The vocabulary is consistent. Um, and that's kind of been what really clicked for me is when I saw so many of them describe it in similar terms.
That is a very interesting aspect of near death experiences and a very common, I think it's a common thread as
Yep.
well. A lot of near death experiencers have experienced that mind to mind communication. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's
And
fascinating.
it doesn't happen through it's not a back and forth kind of exchange, because that assumes sort of a linear before and then construction. It's as I understand it, it's instantaneous and it's all understood at once. So it kind of feels like there's a melding between people. And I ran a survey again to see if, people can, again, non-near death experiencers predict this form of communication. I set them up with sort of a leading question. I said, how would you expect a being, higher dimensional being, to communicate to you in a near death experience? So it's like I'm cueing them for a non-ordinary form of experience. And most of them, a good amount of them, 45%, reported verbal means. 55% of them did report telepathic means, but when they got into the actual detail of describing those telepathic means, it wasn't anywhere like what near-death experiencers describe. It was more done in terms of a verbal linear sentence construction that kind of evolves back and forth in time. So for me, this is a very exciting the state of near-death experience. I think that there's a lot of questions to be asked here. I think that um, you know it's there are more questions than answers. I still find myself constantly being challenged by them, and we'll also add that just meeting the near-death experiencers and communicating to them, you can kind of tell that something's a little off with them. And I mean that in a good way. There's something off with them. Again, they sometimes speak through code. They you know, like again, that session I was in with a bunch of mystical experiencers and near death experiencers, like we were all talking about certain concepts, and then uh, the near death experiencer just chimed in at the end. She was very soft spoken, and she just said, I think that this is all about love, and went into that. It's like, you would say that. Like, I wasn't even thinking about the concept of love, and then you brought it up. It's just like, it's esoteric. It's very I don't know what to make out of it. It's a fascinating phenomenon.
Well, I can vouch for that. They definitely have a different energy about them. They have a big, powerful
Yes.
energy, beautiful and loving, not like powerful as in control over something else, but as in they are powerful within themselves. And I can feel it coming across the computer through the computer
Yes.
screen. It's amazing.
Yes. One person said to me that, I'm happy that we're just starting to wake up to the great possibility of how beautiful existence is. I'm like, that's such a peculiar thing to write. Like, out of all the things you can write, to write that, it's like, wow. There is definitely a type of energy that is off with them, and they don't come with an agenda. Oftentimes they're very humble about what they don't know, and when they speak, it's coming from a perspective. This is something that really happened to me, and I'm gonna report it to you um, as it happened. And the last thing I want to say is that I asked my dad, and kind of before speaking to you, what's the kind of his big takeaway from his experience? What's something that he feels that um, people are not quite appreciating enough about his near death experience? And he told me that he feels that people are not quite understanding that there is something larger than ourselves out there, that there's something beyond ourselves, and that therefore we shouldn't be selfish, which is again very interesting that he leaves with sort of a moral note at the end that we shouldn't be selfish. It's just like I don't know why they're describing these things. It's a changed personality that's consistent with the near death experiencers that to me tells me that they came back they returned from a similar reality.
And that to me is a pointer to indicate even more evidence that we are all one, not
Yeah,
to be selfish.
yeah, sure. We're all connected. Um, I believe that we came from a source, and I think we're returning. Well, it makes sense to me that we all return back to that source. Yeah.
Well, if my viewers wanted to review your research or read your book or just reach out to you if they have more questions, would that be okay with you?
Yeah, they can find me at whydoesrealityexist.com. I only have published that book, but I'm working on the second book on near-death experiences, and happy to kind of share the research that I'm getting from it.
I can see a bright future for you in near-death experience studies, and thank you for your dedication. It really truly helps a lot of people.
Yes, thank you, and I appreciate what you're doing because I feel that there's not enough kind of voices out there for this type of perspective, this idea that we're spiritual beings having a human experience, not humans having an occasional spiritual experience. I think is something that's going to be a paradigm shift for us, but I think we're getting there. So,
We're getting there slowly but surely until every ear has heard the near-death experience. I'm not going to stop. So,
yes.
thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you so much.
Yes, thank you so much.